Payment within 30 days. I felt my stomach twist. $1,000? For fixing my own deck. That night, I couldn't sleep. I read through every line of the HOA bylaws they had given me when I moved in. Buried on page 27, I found something interesting: any modification required prior approval from the HOA board. I hadn't known that, but here's the kicker: the HOA had 30 days to respond to any submitted application. If they didn't, the request was considered approved by default. And guess what? I had emailed them about replacing the deck 6 weeks ago. I had proof. The next day, I printed the email chain, including timestamps, and dropped it off at their office. A week later, I got another letter, not an apology, not an acknowledgement, but another warning. It said I was failing to comply with association enforcement procedures. That's when I realized, this wasn't about the deck. This was about control. I started asking around, quietly. Turns out, the HOA had a pattern. They targeted homeowners who didn't attend meetings or speak up, slapping them with fines that often went unquestioned. The money went into their community improvement fund, a fancy way of saying their own bank account. But I wasn't about to let them get away with it. I gathered every document I could find: emails, meeting notes, financial reports that were publicly posted on their website. Something didn't add up. Their maintenance expenses were strangely high, yet no new projects had been completed in over a year. I wasn't just dealing with a nosy HOA anymore. There was something deeper. A few days later, I received an invitation to the next HOA board meeting. It was supposed to be a hearing about my violation. I showed up early, documents in hand. Carol sat at the head of the table, her clipboard ready, a smug smile on her face. They started reading out my offenses, talking about non-compliance and unauthorized construction. When I asked to speak, Carol interrupted me, saying my time would come later. But when it did, I calmly handed over my printed emails and pointed to the bylaw clause. The room went quiet. One of the other board members looked nervous. Carol's smile faded slightly, but she brushed it off, saying, "We'll review this." I left that meeting knowing something had cracked. The next morning, a neighbor named Paul knocked on my door. He whispered, "You really shook them up last night." Turns out, he had once been fined for lawn neglect while recovering from surgery. He told me that when he tried to appeal, Carol shut him down too. That's when I decided, I wasn't going to stop with just clearing my fine. I was going to expose everything. I began filing Freedom of Information requests, reaching out to the HOA's management company, and asking for expense records. Slowly, the puzzle pieces started to fit. Payments made to consultants, checks written to names that didn't match any legitimate contractors, and bank transfers to private accounts that looked suspiciously personal. This wasn't just about my $1,000 fine anymore. It was about corruption. And I was determined to make them pay, literally. As I sat at my desk, surrounded by papers, one thought echoed in my mind. They tried to fine me $1,000. But when I'm done, they'll be the ones paying the price. The day after the hearing, things felt different in the neighborhood. People who used to wave politely now lingered longer when I passed by. They'd whisper, then glance my way. Word had spread fast, I had stood up to the HOA. At first, I wasn't sure if that was a good or bad thing. But soon, something strange happened. People began to quietly approach me. An older couple from down the street told me they'd been fined for parking violations, even though they'd been using their driveway. A single mom showed me letters demanding she remove her patio furniture because it didn't meet aesthetic standards. Every story had the same theme: Carol and her board using fear, intimidation, and bogus fines to squeeze money from residents who didn't fight back. That's when I knew I wasn't alone. I created a folder on my laptop titled HOA Investigation. Inside it, I began collecting everything: scanned letters, photos, emails, and testimonies from neighbors. Each file painted a clearer picture of what was really going on. The HOA's financial reports were public, but they were confusing on purpose, vague line items like consulting services or grounds maintenance. I compared those reports with city permits and invoices, and something didn't line up. For example, the HOA claimed to have spent $25,000 on sidewalk repairs, yet no one could remember any sidewalks being fixed. One evening, I printed everything out and laid it across my living room floor. The pattern was undeniable. Money was missing, a lot of it. The key name that appeared over and over again: Carol Jenkins. Her signature was on every authorization form. Her approval on every transfer. And every consultant the HOA had paid was either a relative or a fake business linked back to her address. I realized I wasn't just fighting a power-hungry HOA president. I was uncovering fraud. But the more I dug, the more dangerous it felt. A few days later, I came home to find a bright orange slip taped to my front door, another violation notice. This one claimed my front shrubs exceeded height limits. I measured them, they didn't. This was personal now. I took photos and sent a copy of every violation to a state housing compliance agency. I also reached out to a local reporter who had covered HOA corruption stories in the past. At first, she didn't reply. Then, late that night, an email came through. "I've been hearing rumors about your HOA. If you have documentation, I want to see it." That was the spark I needed. Within days, I met her at a small coffee shop. I brought a thick folder full of evidence. As I went through it page by page, her eyes widened. When she saw the financial inconsistencies, she nodded slowly and said, "This is enough to start digging." But when word got out that I'd spoken to the press, things escalated. The HOA sent me a final notice threatening legal action if I didn't pay the $1,000 fine. Carol accused me of defamation during the next community meeting, calling me a troublemaker. But she didn't realize that I had recorded that meeting, legally. And in that recording, she made a major mistake. She mentioned the consulting payments, the same ones I had already traced to her own company. Her voice was clear, her name was mentioned, and the date matched the suspicious transfers. That was my smoking gun. I forwarded the evidence to both the reporter and the state's HOA oversight office. Then, I waited. Weeks passed. The HOA went unusually quiet. The violation notices stopped. Even Carol seemed to have vanished from her usual morning patrols. I started to think maybe they'd realized they were caught and were trying to cover their tracks. Then, one afternoon, I saw two black sedans parked in front of the HOA office. Two men in suits were carrying boxes of documents out the door. A third was talking to Carol on the sidewalk. She looked pale. I didn't have to guess who they were, investigators. Later that week, the local news broke the story. Local HOA under investigation for financial mismanagement, president accused of embezzling funds. It was surreal watching it on TV. My quiet suburban neighborhood, the one I'd chosen for peace, was now on the evening news. The report confirmed what I had discovered. Carol had been funneling HOA funds into a fake maintenance company she owned under her cousin's name. Thousands of dollars had been stolen. Neighbors who once avoided me now came by to thank me. Some even cried. They'd been living under her thumb for years. But it wasn't over yet. The HOA's lawyer sent me another letter, claiming I had defamed the board and breached confidentiality. It was a scare tactic, but I had enough evidence to fight back. My lawyer sent a counternotice demanding the HOA remove all fines, reimburse me for legal fees, and publicly issue a retraction. For weeks, I heard nothing. Then, one morning, a new letter arrived, this time not in a colored envelope, not with threats, but with a single sentence. The HOA has dropped all fines and closed your case. I thought it was over. But what I didn't know was that the story wasn't just about to end, it was about to flip. Because the state investigators had found more than just stolen money. They had found falsified tax filings, fake invoices, and misused reserve funds. The HOA wasn't just corrupt, it was bankrupt. And because I had been the whistleblower, I was about to get something none of them expected. A refund. A big one. By the time the investigation wrapped up, our once peaceful neighborhood had become the center of a scandal no one could ignore. The HOA sign that once stood proudly near the entrance, maintaining community harmony since 1998, now looked like a joke. It was stained, tilted, and barely hanging on. Just like the people who ran it. Weeks passed, and official letters began arriving in everyone's mailboxes, not from the HOA this time, but from the State Housing Compliance Office. Each homeowner received a detailed notice explaining what had been uncovered: years of financial fraud, illegal fee collections, and unauthorized spending by the board. And right in the middle of it all, Carol Jenkins. She had been arrested for embezzlement and fraud. Her face appeared on the local news, that same smug smile now replaced with a blank stare as she was led out of her house in handcuffs. The image spread quickly through every local Facebook group and HOA forum in town. People were furious, and relieved. But the real shock came a week later. The state announced that due to the fraudulent activities, all fines collected during Carol's term were being reviewed for reimbursement. Anyone who had been unfairly charged would be refunded, with interest. I couldn't believe what I was reading. A few days later, I received an official letter with the state seal. It contained a check and a short note. Reimbursement for unlawful HOA fine, $1,000 plus accrued interest and damages. I just sat there, staring at the number. It wasn't just $1,000. With interest and damages, the total came to $2,345. The same HOA that had tried to intimidate me, silence me, and fine me, was now paying me back double. But it wasn't just about the money. The neighborhood changed overnight. With Carol gone, the HOA board was dissolved. A temporary state-appointed administrator stepped in to manage the community. For the first time in years, homeowners were allowed to attend open meetings, vote on budgets, and actually have a say in their neighborhood. People started smiling again. Front yards bloomed with new flowers, kids played outside without anyone writing them up for noise violations, and neighbors who used to keep their heads down now waved proudly at one another. It felt like we had taken our community back. As for me, I didn't stop there. The local reporter who first covered the story reached out again, this time to interview me. She called it, "The Homeowner Who Fought Back." The segment went viral. Messages poured in from people across the country, homeowners who had been bullied, fined, and silenced by corrupt HOAs. Many said my story gave them courage to stand up too. That's when I realized, this wasn't just a personal victory. It was a message. No one, not even an HOA, is above accountability. A few months later, the neighborhood held a community barbecue, the first one in years. No HOA rules, no sign-up lists, no approval forms. Just people laughing, sharing food, and living freely in their own homes. Someone raised a toast to the person who started it all, and everyone turned to me. I smiled awkwardly, but deep down, I felt proud. Not for the attention, but for proving that standing up for yourself, and your rights, is always worth it. Before I left that night, I walked past the old HOA office. It was empty now. The once shiny door plaque was gone, the windows dusty. But I noticed something taped inside the glass, a letter I hadn't seen before. It was the HOA's final financial statement. At the bottom, a note from the administrator read: "Funds recovered and redistributed to homeowners affected by prior mismanagement." Below that was a list of names. Mine was near the top. I smiled. From being fined to being refunded, it had come full circle. Standing there, I thought about how close I'd come to just paying the fine and moving on. How easy it would have been to let them win. But if I had, the corruption would have continued. Sometimes, all it takes is one person refusing to back down to make an entire system crumble. And that's exactly what happened here. Now, every time I sit on my backyard deck, the same deck that started it all, I can't help but laugh a little. It's solid, perfectly built, and yes, still unapproved. But I don't care. Because this deck isn't just wood and nails. It's a reminder that when someone tries to take what's yours, your peace, your money, your home, you don't always have to fight with anger. Sometimes, you fight with truth, persistence, and a mountain of paperwork. They tried to fine me $1,000. But now, they owe me. And I made sure the whole world knew it.